Welcome to Niche Fighter Monday, everyone. Like I said, I'm Mr. MKL. We're hanging out in the digital basement, and today we are going to be talking about EVO. Evolution 2023, what happened there, the EVO Indie Showcase, and then we're going to explore some games that some games that maybe should have been showcased in the EVO Indie Showcase were we to have the proper format for it, but fear not, we're going to take a look at them here. So, EVO, friends, y'all gotta know, EVO, the largest fighting game, the largest open bracket fighting game tournament in existence. There were a total of like 11,000 competitors, 20 plus thousand attendees, 7,000 plus for Street Fighter 6 alone. This was a wildly huge game. The first time I went to EVO was like 2016, and I think there were around 4,000 players for Street Fighter 5. That number has, gone up by 50% is wild. Like the number of people competing in a larger variety of games is bigger than ever, and that's great. That is fantastic. I love it. It's really interesting seeing EVO. 2016, I think, was the last year that EVO had any did their grand finals in the hotel ballroom as opposed to a dedicated venue space. The move to dedicated top 8 day at a separate venue with like high production values, that was kind of like the first notable moment in this like larger culture shift in fighting games, where you started having more attention paid to fighting game tournaments and more corporate and developer publisher sponsored tours and events, injecting more money, injecting this bigger like esports style promotional aspect to it. And I think last year the EVO team, after several years under less than ideal leadership, and after someone was ousted and new folks came in, Rick the Hado ended up in charge as GM of EVO, and they have really tried to change the direction of what EVO is doing. Rick the Hado coming from the combo breaker background and taking inspiration from things like music festivals, things like Warped Tour, higher production value, still all about community. A lot of those events, things like MagFest, are very community focused, incorporate various disciplines, art, gaming, all that kind of stuff, right? Warped Tour was music and art and graffiti and skateboarding, right? And so like that's kind of the vibe that Rick has been pulling in, and the new ethos and direction for EVO. I think there's been some growing pains with how effective they have been in doing that. And I mean, like, in fairness, it's been 2 years of Rick at the helm and this new like dedicated direction. And I think they have taken some good steps, bringing back the Tom and Tony Cannon Award, bringing in Animivo/Vortex Gallery as community events organizers, offering them medals and space and equipment support and stream support and stuff like that. Those are all important things, and like really making EVO what it's about, which is the community focus, right? Though that is directly at odds with this larger esports corporate nature that now that EVO is taken over and owned in part by Sony and an esports org. That changes the dynamic. And you've seen in the last 2 years non-endemic sponsors, so sponsors that aren't core to the fighting game community or the gaming community, come in and think in response to EVO being associated with organizations like Sony now. With that comes a certain level of, we have a responsibility to our sponsors and our ad people, where we can no longer just do the native embedded style advertising that most fighting game grassroots tournaments do, and it has to be much more explicit, where you have your ad reads, you have your dedicated time, you have to hit all your spots, all that kind of good stuff. You're living up to all these corporate standards now because you have this high-level corporate non-endemic sponsor. There is this change in ethos within EVO over the last 5 years, which is like corresponded to a culture shift in the fighting game community at large. More open, more distributed, nicher in a lot of ways, online communities popping up, becoming much more progressive in some of their values and some of their interests. And that has changed the dynamic in the fighting game community, and this has happened in relation, like in tandem with the change in EVO. And I think the Rick and the EVO folks do generally line up with this new cultural shift and the cultural tone that is coming up within the fighting game community. So like, I think those are all good things, right? They're definitely all good things, and I'm glad that those are happening. There's just some like some struggles along the way in terms of developing that. And I mean, that's gonna happen. Like that's like the starting point for this is where EVO has been over the last 5 years and where the community is going and the direction of the event and what they kind of want to accomplish. You have, like, I mean, I had a little exchange with Rick on Twitter after last year's EVO about the Indie Showcase, where I was like, I'm glad that the Indie Showcase exists. The Indie Showcase is one of these things that the EVO team has done to bring in and to recognize the fact that the FGC is more than just your Street Fighters and Tekkens and stuff like that. It is these smaller scenes, these indie developers who are doing good and new and interesting things. Those are people, and those aspects of the community are valuable and part of what makes us the FGC. So one of the things they've tried to do is bring in indie developers and niche fighting games, and now have been, they brought on the Vortex Gallery team to run the community-sponsored events. And then even outside of that, they've done this indie game showcase starting last year, right? And I thought the idea was really cool. Like the core concept of the indie game showcase is we're gonna give a block of our main stage time to the developers who typically struggle to get this kind of platform. It's huge having thousands of viewers. There were like 100,000 people watching in finals, probably, I don't know, 10,000 people watching during the EVO Indie Showcase, right? 10,000 eyeballs is something that I don't think any indie dev is going to scoff at. That's going to be a huge win if you can get that kind of attention. So they're like, let's do this like 30-minute block where we have a bunch of trailers from indie devs. They get to submit them and we get to showcase it on our mainstream. That's good. That's good. So we want to talk about like the good, the bad, and the ugly of the EVO Indie Showcase. This is a good place to start. That's good. It is important to start incorporating the indie and niche stuff in order to say like, yeah, it's not this other thing. This is part of our identity. Doing that, they incorporate it into the mainstream. That's a great start. Okay, but the problem there, and this is was my initial, I think, note of how we could improve it, is that since it's all kind of just like, here's a block of trailers. Two things happen. First, it is segregated. It's gated. You know that the indie stuff is happening in this 30-minute block. So if you don't want, like, right, if you don't want to watch it, that's easily excised from your viewing thing. Boom, I click over to EVO 2 through 8 and I get to ignore that completely. So in terms of integration, it kind of fails there. And then in terms of like presentation, it appears as an ad block, right? It doesn't appear as this is a celebration. It appears as here's 30 minutes of advertising, go, which I think a lot of players and a lot of viewers are going to look at that and say, great, I'm tuning out, right? I know I'm getting 5 minutes of Chipotle ads, great, I'm tuning out. I know I'm getting 30 minutes of trailers and that are ostensibly ads, great, I'm out. Doing something to better integrate, like, because the core concept of we should show off these trailers, we should give an opportunity and a platform to these indie devs, that is amazing. The question is then, how do we better integrate that so that it shows that it is a part of the wider community, not this sectioned off thing that you can ignore? And then, how do we make it seem more natural, as opposed to, here's an ad block that should be ignored, right? Those are kind of like my two main concerns. Like, yeah, Andrew's saying it was indie trailers and then immediately Chipotle, right? And so when you buffer it like that, what are you saying about the content? It's not a content block then, it's an ad block. And I think the core issue there is that, sure, for a game like Street Fighter 6, for a game like Tekken, you can make a trailer and have the announcement trailer be the treat for the viewer, right? That's an inherent treat. They're there for the tournament, and then you show up and say, hey, look at this cool new stuff that we're doing. That's a treat. When you present it as a block of trailers, though, it is not a treat, it's medicine. Here's the marketing plan of the developer, lay them out, right? And it's like, it's more akin to a giant press release than it is a treat for the viewer and the fan. Not sandwiching it in between everything. And we want to talk about another part of the good for this year's EVO Indie Showcase. Part of the good is that they actually changed. The initial format was that it was going to be a 30-minute block and that's it, or a 20-minute block and that's it. And then what the team did was they said, no, we're going to break it up into two different blocks. So there's going to be a 12-minute block here and like a 12-minute block there. That's actually good because they actually put the blocks next to other community-related things. So they brought back the Tom and Tony Cannon Award, the Good Community Member of the Year Award. This is a person we should celebrate. That is a great thing that they brought back, and they incorporated it and they put it right next to a bunch of the indie trailers, which actually signals to the viewer that these indie trailers are part of a celebration, much like this Tom and Tony Cannon Award. So, like Andrew was saying, hey, this is a problem. You're just putting trailers next to ads. It's just an ad. Look, now we're putting these trailers next to another community celebration. This is how you edit together a story and tell someone what you're expecting and what values you're trying to connect between things. This is an important part of stream production. So the move that they did was actually part of the good. But that leads to a bit of the ugly, actually. And a bit of the ugly was the lack of communication. And there was a distinct lack of communication from the Evo indie game folks to the developers about what was happening. And this is like part of the benefit of me being able to peek behind the scenes a little bit. The large number of folks who are like, we have not been told if we've been accepted into the showcase. We don't know. And then you expect to be able to tune into a showcase at a specific time, and it happens 2 hours earlier, and then it also happens at the time that you expect it. And there was no communication that the 5 o'clock Eastern was gonna be still an indie block, even after they showed half of an indie block 2 hours prior. That kind of lack of communication and that changing of the schedule without any actual indication that the schedule has changed. If you looked at it, it was still the same, but they mixed it up, right? I think the mix-up was actually for the better, and it would have been great if they had communicated that. But this dropping the ball in the communication, which I can actually forgive to a certain degree. Like, this is a massive production with an insane amount of logistics, so the fact that something happens in your production that forces a change in schedule, or you recognize an improvement to your scheduling down the line to a point where it's hard to retcon everything else and start conveying that to folks on the fly. I understand how that stuff can get dropped, but in terms of, hey, note, how do we improve this? That kind of communication is better improved. It could be way improved and would have helped the experience so much. Yeah, sad to hear the trailers being treated like ads. That's the indie dev's time to shine. Exactly, Punk, right? That's the hope, right? And I think that, like I said before, there's the bit of this misconception that the fact that there is a trailer is a treat, but that applies for the major franchises and the fans who are there for that major franchise for another reason. People, I think, are a little less inclined to show up to a here's even if the majors did it, here's 30 minutes of random trailers for major games. Yeah, that would be a draw because people want to see it, but at the same time, it's far more medicine than it is treat. I think they just missed the balance on that, right? And the change to the schedule to make it sandwiched between other community events, I would like to see that expanded. And instead of doing a here's a trailer block, here's the awards, here's the this, here's the that, say we have 2 hours or an hour of community celebration. This is the community celebration block, which includes trailers, which includes the awards, which includes maybe cosplay events. They were doing reports from the show floor, right? Why not go and do a report from the show floor where you find an artist and you show off the artist booth? You find a couple of cosplayers doing cosplay and doing poses and taking pictures, and you do that, and you do a little 3-minute interview, and then you have this little 5-minute block of cosplay, and then you have a little 90-second trailer, and then you have an artist celebration, and then you have 3 or 4 trailers. Maybe you butt up the trailers with messages from the developers. This is something that I think if you wanted to make more of a connection, make it more natural, make it more of a treat for the viewers as opposed to here's marketing, then incorporate a message from the developer. What does an indie developer want to say to people? Hey guys, look, I am so hyped for Marvel this year. I am working on a game that is a celebration of Marvel vs. Capcom 2. You know what? Let's go check out the trailer I made for Burning Souls, right? Let's do that, right? That is something that, and then you put that in there next to some just straight trailers. Not every trailer has to have that message incorporated, but you do that and you build it out. And then no one is saying, oh, that's the trailer block, tick that off, I'm going to avoid it. It's the community showcase. I want to see the awards. I want to see the Q&As with the developers. I want to see this, that, and the other. And then you have it sprinkled throughout. This way you're not sacrificing any time as Evo, as here we don't have any more ad time. Because another way you could do it is you can incorporate some of these trailers into your standard ad blocks. But those ad blocks are valuable real estate for making these kind of huge events sustainable. So I understand not wanting to give that up. Doing more of a drip feed across a wider community-focused thing, if you want to say that these indies are part of our community and part of our identity, great, I agree. then we should be celebrating them as such. Let's show that they are part and parcel, that they are just as important as the Tom and Tony Cannon Award, that they are just as important as all of our cosplayers showing up to events, that they are just as important as our musicians doing musical breaks. That is something that I think that is going to be the core of it. Yeah, Andrew's saying, look, those showcases, man, you don't know when those indie blocks are going to happen, but you want to see it. And I think that's one of the reasons they made a strict indie block. But I think there's more damage done from that being a block that you can easily avoid, as opposed to not knowing specifically when it is. So, like, I can sit down for an hour or two and check out everything on a stream, and it's going to keep me there for the things that I'm not as interested, to make sure I'm there for the things I am interested in. That's part of the beauty of this kind of programming, that you can actually capitalize on that. Yeah, make it a little bit more incorporated. Don't make it like, hey, at some point in the 12-hour stream today, your trailer's going to air once. 90 seconds across 12 hours, hope you get to catch it. That's actually just as bad, if not worse, than the current block format that you can just ignore. But like a wider range that shows that the indie highlights are just as important as all the other community highlights that we're focusing on, I think would make it much better. Like I said, an hour block, a 2-hour block, right? Spread those, whatever. Maybe you can spread it 2 1-hour blocks, and right, you get people to come back over 2 days, right? This is an incentive for viewers to come and check out stuff that you otherwise would skip, which is something I found myself doing. That's kind of the bad of this, right? Where it's like, I didn't care about whatever, Under Night, or I didn't care about Rivals of Aether, or whatever it might have been, right? I actually did kind of care about Rivals of Aether and was sad that the mic was muted. But that being said, right, if you don't care about something, you just tune out, right? Like, I don't care about Tekken Grand Finals, man, I'm out for an hour. You don't get me at all, right? There's nothing keeping me there. So when you're doing the day one community highlight stuff, the industry event, whatever they called it, having something to ebb and flow to keep me there over longer periods of time, so I know I can't just tune out, is actually better for the stream and for like eyeballs on all the things that might not be able to have as big of a pull, right? Big game announcements from big developers are going to have a way bigger pull than small game announcements from small developers, but you make them ebb and flow, and you can catch a little bit more on the low end. Your valleys aren't as deep, right? That and I think that's what they were trying to do. But I think that they did it okay if you're interested in all of the like higher tier double AAA games. But if you're into the single A games, the indie stuff, then that was still kind of cordoned off and sectioned off, and it was like, it's still a bit of the other. Like, if there was one improvement, it would be make the indie and niche stuff less of an other and more of a core part of our identity as the FGC. They need to seem as if they care for the indie stuff, but here's the problem. Do the staff actually care? That factor, yeah, you can't actually change. And it's true. And I think, like I said, I've had a couple exchanges with Rick about this and with some of the other folks, and they do seem to care and value it, right? Like, Combo Breaker has shown that there's a place for the niche and indie stuff, and they're trying to incorporate that into EVO. The problem is that Combo Breaker, even though it's a massive event and a much higher tier than most fighting game events, it pales in comparison to the kind of corporate and structured version of the event that EVO is, right? So it doesn't have the same leniency to provide that space. Like, you want to talk straight return on investment, there is very little return on investment for EVO for the indie showcase stuff, which is why it is kind of cordoned off and sectioned off and thought of as other. Like, I understand that is probably the reality of it, right? And they do what they can to incorporate it in the ways that they can, but like, I think a lot of the calculus for how it gets incorporated is, how do we minimize the opportunity loss, right? Or the opportunity cost. Maybe they can make indie announcements right before the big one, says Andrew. Like how before the main band on concerts, there's usually a local one, or like the opening acts that do a couple songs. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, right? And that's going to be a bit of the treat to go with the medicine, right? Where it's like, someone who only cares about Tekken isn't going to check out the indie game trailer segment, but someone that cares about Tekken is going to be there 5 minutes before. And maybe you show a trailer for Explode Judo or Schwarzer Blitz. Pick a 3D fighter, an indie 3D fighter that has some crossover, it's like some potential crossover with the community, and put that right in front, right? And then you're like, look, man, we're celebrating the new and 3D fighting games, and it's going to be capped off with Tekken. But first, check out this thing. Y'all don't know about Explode Judo, do you? You're gonna love this. That is 100% some of the programming that needs to be worked into these events. Resistance, what's up, Julio? I found that there was so much really valuable streaming time spent in the starting XX min countdown that could absolutely be used to showcase community highlights, capsules, cosplays, silly interviews, and so on. Bingo. That is the biggest missed opportunity in the spot that it is. And like, yeah, I think that's there to provide the downtime that they can prep everything else. But it would be amazing, right? Like, that is exactly the time that you do a message from the developer in a trailer, and you put it in there, and it's your, hey, 20 minutes till the next thing, and then the screen shrinks down a little, right? You do that like inlay ad thing, and then you show your little countdown in the corner, and then you have your trailer and message from the developer, right? That's a perfect opportunity to do that stuff. That is not costing them ad time. It's not a 20-minute ad block. So putting it in there, it ends up being more of a treat, right? Sure, it's probably going to be sandwiched against that stuff, but it seems like basically free real estate at that point, right? Or cheap real estate. Let me be honest, nothing's free when it comes to organizing these things. Punk saying that they think that the indie scene is pretty large and overwhelming. Maybe talks could happen on how to organize by region or something like that. Then gather under the one larger umbrella. That is absolutely a thing that with the niche and indie fighting game scene is that we are actually remarkably widely distributed across the globe. And because some of our scenes are so clustered and regional, it makes it really hard to have like a strong impact and a strong case where it's like, sure, what if I do a niche fighting game event in Toronto that I host it and I expect, I do 8 games, 10 games, and I expect, 256 players to play across them. How many 256 players are reasonably going to be able to come to an event like that, given the prize payout that I'll be able to afford for it being inherently niche and indie? How much sponsorship could I pull to support the event and pay my staff and, right, in order to do that with off the backs of indie games who have inherently less pull than the majors? It's a tough proposition, and if I can't get 256 from, like, locally, are people going to come from France and Germany and Brazil and Peru and Japan, right, or Australia? And are they going to, for an event of that size, an event of that kind of like providing that opportunity, that value? I would hope so. I would love it. I would do it, but it's not. It's hard to do. So like bridging those gaps is a very important thing. The pandemic forcing a move to online actually helps solidify a lot of those wider communities. And then finding a place to capitalize on those communities, bringing together a lot of them who are near to a place like MagFest, wherever we have a spot that has some regional clustering, right? Using the online spaces to bring in the just slightly disparate regions to get those guys together to show a big enough showing. That's kind of it. And then, I mean, the ideal is that you get to build kind of like regional rivalries and connections, and then you can kind of bridge those gaps, right? But it's the actual act of bridging that gets to be difficult. Oh yeah, no, mentioning, hey, this game is made in Germany, isn't that cool? Can make a huge deal. Absolutely. That's something not to be ignored, right? It is something that I have definitely thought about in terms of just like Canadian fighting games, where I just discovered that Tiger Tournament is made by someone from East Coast Canada, right? Like recently learned Checkmate Showdown is made by a team from Quebec, and right, Heroes Versus is made by a team in Northern Ontario, and right there's Star Cutter doing work out in the West Coast on Blue Bloods Arena and Blue Bloods something or other, Blue Bloods Beatdown, and the Among Us Arena stuff. Like, we have Canadian developers, and I didn't know they were Canadian, and seeing that and realizing that actually got me really excited. That is something of value, especially for an event like EVO, which is so international. You want to talk about community and the stuff that they're doing with community. They announced an announcement that there was going to be an EVO somewhere. We don't know where, but somewhere. There's EVO Japan, there's EVO Vegas, right? There's EVO Prime or whatever you want to call it. They're going to do another one. There's going to be another one, EVO somewhere. We don't know where. likely the EU, very likely somewhere in Europe. Though I'm hoping for South America. That would be amazing. Recognizing now that it's an international event. Yeah, right? Let's celebrate those communities. That's what that's what the Evo Somewhere is supposed to be about. It's recognizing that it's not just North America and the UK and Japan that matter, right? There are large parts of the fighting game community and fighting game identity that are, and the fighting game culture, as Rick put it at Evo this year, that are from Japan and from, like I said, Brazil and Peru and also Canada and all over Europe. Europe is very large. You can't just say Evo Europe and have that be like, look, we got all of Europe covered. No, right? Like, that's not how it works. So, in recognition of that, right? Like, if that's what it's supposed to be about, maybe that should be core to your messaging when you start talking about all these other things. Talk about, I've been talking about it for the last year or two, the indie games of the world, where are you, right? Andrea made an amazing map of indie game devs from across Europe and where they are and the games that they're working on, and there's so many, right? I did a little one for Canada, and I was like, this is sadly small, and now there are actually, it's almost doubled in size. That is something that I think can really, you want to talk about identity and community and celebrating all parts of the fighting game culture. That is something that's really important. Absolutely. Evo Brazil would be amazing, right? It would be amazing. Legitimately. There is there is so much about, like, the South American scene. They get hit hard with pricing. The costs of international travel, from like visas, getting your passport, and then the cost of actually hosting events within their own region. Consoles are insanely expensive. Games are insanely expensive. Regional pricing hits them hard. Right? They've had a really hard time. A lot of South American communities have had a really hard time getting access to the rest of it. It's one thing, like, I can travel to the US fairly easily. I can travel to Europe as a Canadian fairly easily and not really struggle with, like, managing to get there for an event and be part of the FGC. A lot of South American scenes struggle in a way that others don't. And so, like, from distance, from cost of entry, from whatever it may be. And so having something like Evo Brazil or somewhere in South America, because once again, much like Evo Europe, Evo South America is an insufficient singular thing to represent the entire region, right? But that being said, that is a significantly easier get for folks in that region than something like Evo Europe or Evo Vegas or Evo Japan, right? Yeah, Bertman, I don't even have money to go to Brazil, but it would be cool, right? And for sure, like, it's not perfect. Like, even, I mean, I've talked about that before. Like, the cost of travel, like air travel from Canada to any international place, is actually pretty expensive. It is surprisingly expensive. Thanks, oligopolies. But it's still significantly cheaper than a lot of other places, right? And that's it. And it's like getting from Brazil to Europe, if it's in the UK or if it's in Germany or wherever, like, that can be really prohibitively expensive. Even though it can still be expensive to travel within South America, I think it's a significantly easier get for many more people. It is one of those things that provides great opportunity for a scene which I think has traditionally had opportunities either ripped from them or just, like, farther out of reach, right? But this is part of the thing that Evo can do, that Evo can be a benefit. Evo is not perfect for everything, right? Like, Evo probably actually isn't perfect for indie games. It was suggested that the indie games who are, like, looking for major publishers or, like, mid-tier publishers can actually use Evo as a platform to springboard, but a lot of the developers below that threshold who are doing independent publishing, they're not going to get that much benefit from Evo. That's probably not the place for them. That being said, one of the things Evo can do is throw its weight around, right? And it can throw its weight around by simply appearing in a place. If they do Evo Brazil, this suddenly creates an incentive for all of the communities and all of the organizations who do fighting game stuff to rally around a very high point, right? And ideally, they could provide some level of support, some level of accommodations for helping those developers feed into Evo Brazil as an event. But then also, because part of the problem is cost, and creating sustainability in that environment might be harder than in other places, just like sheer cost of consoles and games alone. Suddenly, if you have this kind of infrastructure building towards this higher point, the Evo Brazil, this major tournament, then you have more incentive. You could ideally have more players come out who will add to your level of sustainability to hosting these events and can make your events and your resource pool bigger, which can even if Evo then doesn't do an annual Evo Brazil, but hopefully they would, that means that there is this kind of infrastructure in this community that has something to strive towards, as this incentive to push them forward, and can hopefully kind of raise, like, it would raise all boats. Rising tide raise all boats. Evo's a big boat. If it comes into this relatively small pool, that can push everybody up. The hope is that you can maintain some of that level rising, even if Evo departs, right? Which has proven very, admittedly, historically difficult. But this is, like, it's an opportunity. It's one of the ways that Evo can throw its weight around and prove to be more useful than just it being the Super Bowl or the Olympics of fighting games. That is the pinnacle, right? It could be the pinnacle that entire base camp and community gets built around, and that becomes sustainable because there is a pinnacle to attend or to achieve. Birdman never heard about Chipotle until last week. That's actually really funny. That is a very good point. It's very US focused. It's true. Like, Chipotle exists in Canada, but, like, not on the same scale. I never see them. I mean, this is historically an issue with our events, which are very North American focused. And I will say, as a resident of North America, when they say North America, they really mean the United States of America, right? The number of things that, like, giveaways and contests, events that I don't have access to because I'm a Canadian, even though it's a North American event, is startling. And this extends to things like the advertising stuff. And I mean, I think that's a level of, once again, logistics that is very difficult to achieve, of doing regional advertising. I don't know how much. I mean, I guess the Twitch-fed ads were probably all region-based, but yeah, the embedded native marketing of the stream itself, that's just whatever they can get, and they're primarily an American. It's being hosted in America, so it stands to reason that it would be American, right? Punk can confirm, forgets that Canada's part of North America. There you go. Yeah, we're Cold America Electric Boogaloo, for sure. Hydroelectric Boogaloo, to be precise. And Andrew, yes, you're right. You could do things like McDonald's, you could do things like phone stuff. And this is it. So it's only been 2 years of realistically Evo gaining non-endemic sponsors. And so for those who don't know, when I say, like, endemic sponsors would be sponsors core to the community of the event that you're running. So an endemic sponsor for League of Legends would be Razer for their peripherals, or Intel for their computer parts, or Acer for their monitors. Within the fighting game community, once again, some of those endemic sponsors are the same. Acer, whatever monitor provider, and then you have the, like, console sponsors, the developer, the game sponsors, as well as peripherals, Victrix, and Mad Cats and stuff like that. Those would all be endemic sponsors. And then non-endemic sponsors are sponsors that are not core to the community, right? So, like, Monster, Red Bull. Red Bull has long been a non-endemic sponsor that's kind of embedded themselves in the fighting game community as saying, like, hey, we're the big ones that you can come to for this kind of alt sport event, from, like, downhill skateboarding and X Games style stuff to esports. But Chipotle is a huge non-endemic sponsor. Like, Chipotle doesn't really give, two wits about the fighting game community or even the gaming community, other than they're a market who might eat Chipotle, right? And so the fact that they are like the premier sponsor of Evo, of a fighting game event, I think that shows that this is, like, there's an opportunity here where, instead of it being a smaller fish in terms of a sponsor saying, I want to compete in a smaller pond so I can be the big fish, saying, why am I going to go up against these big dudes over here? I can kind of take over this smaller gaming fighting game market. You now have the big sponsors, the big companies, also saying there's money to be made on these people, right? And so they start coming in. But it's only been a year or two of non-endemic sponsors. And so things like McDonald's, things like Roam Mobility, or, like, whatever these international roaming mobile plans, like, those are, like, non-endemic but tangentially related things, like, right? Like, your demographics in fighting games are going to have crossover with your demographics in other things, even though they're not endemic, right? So things like lifestyle brands, energy drinks, fast food, right? Like, why isn't Samsung shilling smartwatches? Like, you can walk around a FGC event and see a whole ton of smartwatches and people on their tablets and their new phones and their new hats and their new shoes, talking about their shoe collection, talking about their custom keyboards, right? Like, why don't we have custom keyboard makers selling that stuff, right? Even if it's not a peripheral, even if it's not a PC tournament, there are members of the fighting game community who prize that stuff, right? Like, there's all of these opportunities, and I think now that that door has been opened with a major one like Chipotle, a lot of the other ones are going to start seeing that opportunity, and we're going to start seeing more of those non-endemic sponsors come in. And yeah, it doesn't have to be directly related, but being somewhat international is going to be key if you want. And I think that's really part of the selling point of some of these events, right? The fact is that they're very international, man. You look around and you have competitors from Japan and South Korea and the United Arab Emirates and Canada and the US and Australia, and you have people like literally all over the world, and you're going to have fans and viewers from all over the world because of that. So you could have a really strong selling point to the international brands who want to reach the young 20 to 30 something, largely male, often technical, often professional, with a surprising amount of disposable income. We talk about how poverty the FGC is. A not insignificant amount of the FGC has far more disposable income than they like to let on. They think about going to tournaments and saying, damn, I can't afford that $10. But that was 15 years ago, and things have kind of changed for a lot of us. So, like I said, you look at the people who buy into fashion and the hat collection and the shoe collection, like I said, those things are like readily apparent in the fighting game community. If you engage in these communities, you will see it readily, regularly. People keeping up on the newest tech, people keeping up on the newest thing. They are obviously spending their money on these things. There's an opportunity there for people for more sponsorships to come in and make these things more sustainable for more people. That 15-year-old that said $10 is too much 15 years ago is 30 years old now, right? And hey, I'm the first to admit that I totally get that everyone has their own financial situation and that it is not sustainable and it is not possible for a lot of people, even if they're 30 or 40 or 50. I don't want to just say, hey, tough shit, you're out of the community. That's not what it's about. But the common perception of we're nothing but 19-year-olds with no money. I like that. Like look at Evo and the people that were there, and the number of people who are able to use their disposable income to spend that cash to travel across the world, to pay very high prices for lodgings, right? To pay a not insignificant sum for their entry fee and their tournament fees. It's happening, right? It's happening. So why there's this like idea that we're all children who can't afford $5 because then I can't eat lunch tomorrow at school? I don't know why that is. That's kind of Evo. That's kind of the indie showcase. The indie showcase, yeah, I think, like I said, there's some things we can do to improve on it. I am personally looking ahead to like, what am I going to do here in the digital basement? And one of those things is do something. I mean, like, so you might remember the Niche Fighter Fete last year. Punk, Flynn, and I ran the Niche Fighter Fete, and it was kind of a celebration of indie and niche fighting games. Hosted tournaments, did panels, had interviews, devlogs, community events, got quiz shows and stuff. It was really great. And we also got to show off like a new trailer for Super Robo O and new info about Beasts of Mystery, and it was all in the effort to raise some money to help Mega Knockdown and D-Hamster in the development of their game Mega Knockdown, and to be able to get new art in the game and to hire an artist and kind of polish up the game to a point, and to be able to give it the love and the due that it deserves to make it shine. And like, it was amazing, and we managed to raise like over $800 for Mega Knockdown, and D-Hamster was able to hire an artist, Alan McMillan, and they have been working very hard to spruce up that game. My response to the Evo Indie Showcase last year was, what can we do to support our indies? What can we do to celebrate our indies? And the Niche Fighter Fete was one of the impetus for the Niche Fighter Fete, and that's kind of what came out of it, right? Looking at the Evo Indie Showcase this year, I'm like, okay, what do we need to improve upon? What can we do? And so I am in the planning stages for the Niche Fighter Fete and for some other community-focused endeavors that we can hopefully rally around and use to not only support our artists, our favorite artists, and our community, and celebrate the fans and the viewers and the players, but also like provide some like real world tangible support for our indies and help like realize their visions, which is ideally what we're able to do and we're able to pull together as a community to do that. So that's what I'm working on, and I'm gonna be like feeding off some of my thoughts here on the Evo showcase to say, how can we improve? Because they did do some stuff that was really right, and they do have, I think, the right idea and drive behind it, even though if they are probably hamstrung by the nature of the event of Evo in terms of what they can do with execution in a way that a smaller organization like us at the Digital Basement will not be hamstrung by. So that's the plan going forward. And I hope you all join me for the ride. It's going to be super fun. I would love to be able to incorporate other things into the Niche Fighter Fete in order to make that celebration and make that platform even bigger and more valuable, right? Like that is the ultimate goal, where it's like, hey, we showed that we can raise some money and awareness for our indie devs and celebrate our community and just have a good time while we're at it. Let's push that forward, and let's pay that forward to another org, and let's like make ourselves stronger, right? That's the goal. That's where we're at. I'm gonna be, like I said, I'm gonna be working on some more community events going forward, in part because of all this. But you know what? I'm gonna take a little bit of a break. We've been at this for over an hour now. I'm gonna take a quick little break, and we're gonna come back, and we're gonna do our own little indie showcase, right? I wanna take a look at a handful of the games that didn't get their trailer into the Evo Indie Showcase this year, which I think deserve a look. I'm going to go top up my drink. We are going to come back in just a couple minutes and take a look and do the Digital Basement Indie Showcase. We're going to be right back, friends. Stay with me, get a snack. I'll see you in a sec.